Be nice if when you played a hot lick, money would fall down from the sky.
Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman, and this is another episode of Westdoc Online. We have a terrific documentary and documentary filmmaker today of a musical, or not a musical, but a documentary all about the best musicians in the world. But before we get to it, I want to remind you again, as you probably heard if you've watched any of these episodes, we're brought to you in part by Real Screen Magazine. Real Screen Summit is having their annual event. Be there, be square. Every buyer and seller that's of any import in the non-scripted documentary, non-fiction world is going to be there. You go to our page at westdoconline.com, go down to the bottom and click on Real Screen. It'll take you right to registration. And right next to that icon, there's a riverside.fm icon, which is the platform we're using right now to try and get us the best possible quality, because we record on separate computers and we're not dependent on the internet except when they transfer to the cloud. So now, having said all that, it's my pleasure to introduce Denny Tedesco. Hi, Denny. How are you?
How you doing? Very
Good.
well, Chuck. How are you?
Great. Denny is the director of the new documentary called The Immediate Family. Do you want to give us the one-sentence TV guide description of what the film is?
Ooh,
maybe?
Sure. You put me on the spot there. The one sentence. Basically, it's the story of the session players of the singer-songwriter era in the 1970s, 80s, and onward. The folks that did the Carole King, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt, that era of music. They were the recording guys in the studio, and then they went on the road with them.
Well, I think that's a good start. I can say personally, even though the film isn't out publicly, of course, I've seen the film, and I must say, I watch a lot of documentary films, and sometimes it's torture to watch a documentary film, but it's a really good film, and so you recommend it because it has an important message, or it's exposing some criminals or getting somebody out of jail or something. This film is a terrific film, and it is a pleasure to watch this film.
Thank you.
Because there's how many songs are in it? Every single song. You could probably sing along with every. Well, if you're over 20, you probably know every song. How many songs actually did you have to clear for this?
I think we're up to 80. I want to say 80, which is the last film, The Wrecking Crew. It took me 110 songs. So I think I'm getting better at it.
Well, let's back up a half a step and talk about The Wrecking Crew, that you directed, which is a fabulous film about the session musicians in the 60s that were the sort of secret weapon of rock and roll and other music. And your dad was one of the session musicians?
Yeah, Dad, Tommy Tedesco. I did that and started in 1996 when Dad was passing away, and I wanted to tell the story about his friends, an extended family, as I call it, the Wrecking Crew. They were the guys that went to the studios and they did the Beach Boys, Sinatra, Mamas, Papas, Fit to Mention. Anything that came into the studios in the 60s most likely had the studio musicians on there. And because the labels didn't trust the actual bands that were either the backup band for the recording artist or the artist, and because they had to get in and out quickly. Economically, it was better to bring in seasoned session musicians to record all the Phil Spector stuff, the Beach Boys stuff. Like I said, all those groups, Mamas and Papas, they had these guys on it. That was the 60s, and then the times changed at the end of the 60s where they weren't needed as much. So that's where the next generation of players come in, and that's where this film is.
Would you call these guys, Leland Sklar and Danny Kortchmar and Russ Kunkel and Waddy Wachtel, would they call themselves session players?
It's funny. That's a really good. Yes, very much so. At the beginning, it's funny because I look at them as legends. I totally, because I grew up looking at album covers. And that's the big difference between Wrecking Crew and the 60s and these guys. The album covers didn't list the musicians in the 60s. 70s come around, the liner notes start actually listing the musicians. I was talking to Peter Asher, talking about them as legends. He goes, they weren't legends when we were working together. They were friends. You know, if you look at the only one that had probably the more experience in the studio at the time when they were doing Sweet Baby James, Russ Kunkel, his first 3 albums were like Sweet Baby James, Tapestry, and Joni Mitchell's Blue. I mean, he could have quit there and had a legendary career. But it was Leland hadn't really done any studio work. Danny was doing a little here and there, but not really, not enough to say he was a session player. And Waddy wasn't either. And sooner or later, they start building up their resume. And yeah, they become the hot studio players in the 70s.
Did your dad play with these guys, or did they come in
No.
afterwards?
They come in afterwards. It's interesting. The only one that played with him was Leland, because Leland is one of the only guys that transferred or could do television and TV. Because Leland comes from a classical background. I know it doesn't look like it, but he was a classical pianist as a kid, and then changed over at Birmingham High School to play bass. And so he was able to read music and really jump into film and TV. So Mike Post used him all the time, and that's where he met my dad. He and my dad worked together a lot, but never got to work with the other guys.
So there isn't an official trailer yet, but I have what's called a sneak peek, which I took off your website. Let me try and run that now.
Yeah.
KLOS 95.5.
Doctor, my eyes have seen the...
My getting lucky was reading those guys.
She's got to be somebody's babe.
Not only did they give birth to this music that they're playing, they're as much the author of these songs and of this music as the artist that they did it with.
The creative input of these session guys cannot be overstated. It can't be overstated.
These guys were Carole's band and James's band.
We would do a whole project with someone, and then you'd go out on the road and perform it with them.
It was a new way of doing it.
And we'd make an album, and then the rest of the time we'd be on the road. We'd come to album tour, album tour, album tour. But it was really album tour, 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 album tour, 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 tour.
In the early 70s, you couldn't pick up an album and look at the liner notes without seeing these guys' names.
Russ Kunkel, Leland Sklar, Danny Kortchmar, Waddy.
They were there for the song. They wanted it to be the best it could be.
They weren't session musicians. I mean, they were just musicians. And they gradually became legendary session musicians.
We lived in the moment. That song was great, and that record did great. Next, what's next?
I'd like to raise my hand and say I never thought we'd be this old.
I think what keeps us together is because we can. It really genuinely is fun to play this music.
All I could express is admiration for these guys.
You do feel like a unit, like a family.
These are the people that play it best, and these are my best friends. And so I don't need anybody else.
I feel like the luckiest guy in the world that I'm able to play, with my best friends.
I'm still as happy today as I was in 1970.
When you look back in hindsight, I was just happy to be there.
I've got a band full of brothers that love me. I'm proud of all of it.
Well, to me, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the 80 cuts of music.
Right.
And as a producer myself, and I think any documentary producer is watching this, and they're like freaking out, thinking, how you cleared it is because I guess you probably know a lot, obviously, the people who wrote the song, but what about just the cost? I mean, it must have been...
The cost. I mean, you have to budget for the cost, and you have to... here's the thing: is when I was making Wrecking Crew, that was one of the things that everybody said. That's why it took so long to get it out, because they said you're never going to get this made. It's only going to make this much, but it's going to cost this much. It was all economics, and I was not going to take that as an answer. I said, I have to keep going. And it wasn't the publishers, it wasn't the labels that were the problem in the first film. It really was about economics and believing that a documentary could make its money back at some point. This film, I think, listen, you have to pay for music. I'm not a truly, unless you want to give it up for free, that's fine. But my feeling is, listen, I went to college. I went to school. I had medical care. My dad fed us. He's a musician. People should get paid for what they do for a living. And it's no different than the labels and publishers. They have to make money. Whether or not they go and take advantage, that's another story. But none of the labels and publishers have been taking advantage of us. We've working through it.
Wow, just 80 songs though. That's a huge.
Yeah,
and it's almost like wall to wall music in the.
It is. That was one of the things. Again, not to keep going back to the Wrecking Crew, it's the same thing here. You have to tell that story, and the Wrecking Crew is different because I had to wider range of music. The difference is the Wrecking Crew was a factory in a weird way in those days, and I don't mean that derogatory, but they could go from Sinatra to the Chipmunks to the Beach Boys to the Monkees, whatever. And sometimes I always said I wanted to put quantity sometimes versus quality, because I had in the opening sequence there I have Sinatra, then I have the Chipmunks. That's a whole different type of reasoning in my head. Here I was really going for the quality. And there is so much quality to choose from, and you do still have to extend, the different artists that they worked with, and that could have kept on going.
Do you think you got a break at all in the music? Maybe that's an unfair question because of who you are and your background and the Wrecking Crew.
Yes, I do. I think, I hope I did. When I say that is. I have such respect for the musicians. I have respect for the music community. I think there were times where I remember, it's funny, it just came to me. I remember when I was trying to get the other one done in 2006 and 96 on, I remember coming to New York, showing the film to one of the big labels here, literally in their offices, and they had popcorn, and it was, that's how I did it. I built an audience, I built them, but got them behind me. But I do remember that woman saying, she gave me a price, and it was like $10,000 a side, and it was like, it would have made it $1.5 million or whatever it was at that point, $2 million budget in just in music with all those songs, because everybody's most favorite nations. And I was shocked, but at the same time, she said to me, and she said that she gave that to me long before. Later, she said, "Listen, what you just showed me, I always give you that price before, because if you're serious about it, you'll keep on going." She goes, I get all calls all the time. So her first initial price, $10,000 a song, and that was it. It kind of blew me off. Well, once I came out years later to show her the film in the works, she was blown away, and then it was a different attitude. And so what I'm saying is, they got behind it. It's their story as much as the musician's story. And I always remember that someone saying that at a screening, who got out of work at Jimmy Iovine's office, came to watch the film, and she walked away, said, this is why I wanted to be in this business, because of this, meaning the film and what these guys did. And I think it's really a community. Even if you're not a musician, you're still part of it.
And as an audience, wherever you live, like I said, if you're over 20, you know every single song. You could probably sing along to the words of most of the song. I mean, who do you have in the film? James Taylor. You have, producer
Carole King.
Carole King, Lyle Lovett, Jackson Browne, Peter Asher, Phil Collins, David Crosby, Stevie Nicks, Linda Ronstadt, Russ Teidelman, who I went to high school with.
Did you?
Yeah.
Saw him the other night.
It was funny to see him because I haven't seen him in 100 years, almost 100. What was the editing process, and how long did the film take?
Well,
this film take to make?
It was interesting. All right, so when the producers came to me, it was Greg Richling and Jack Pyatt and Jonathan Sheldon. They came to me with this idea. It was actually another project they came to me, and that fell apart, which was fine with me. But they said, we really want to still work with you. Would you be interested? I said, absolutely. And they came up with this project and went, oh, I'm in on that one. That totally makes sense. It was the perfect follow-up. So we met with the band. The band said, yes, we're in. The next day they said, Carole King wants to be interviewed in 3 weeks. She's in town. And I went, uh-oh. Because I was, you BS yourself through an interview, and all of a sudden you got, you pitch them an idea, but you're still learning. My research is kind of like, all right. So I quickly got into it, and then 3 weeks later we had Carole King. It was so fast with the yeses from these people. I had Carole King, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, Billy Bob Thornton, Phil Collins, Linda Ronstadt, Lou Adler. It had to be probably within 2 months. Everybody, all those were in the can, and then we started. Then all of a sudden COVID hit, and everything came to a drastic, like everybody, we all came to a halt, and it was like, uh-oh, we got nothing now, guys. I don't have the guys in the can. I don't have their story, and we still needed to move forward. And I slowly went out with a cameraman and a sound person, and we slowly, safely got the 4 into the like I said, in the can. And what was great about that, I think, because it was good 6-8 months later, maybe 9 months later, we have all become friends at that point. Don't forget, I only knew Leland, really. So getting to know Danny, Russ, and Waddy, and Steve, it was kind of a nice feeling of interviewing the main people much later, because there was a trust between us and a friendship at that point. So once we got that in the can, then we did a few Zoom interviews. Neil Young's Zoom, Stevie Nicks' Zoom, Keith Richards and Steve Jordan Zoom, or sent in. And then I went and got Don Henley and David Crosby. But then we started putting it together, and we started that, and we worked through probably 6 months. Started with one editor, and then he wasn't available, and then we moved to another end. But we finally got through it.
And what was if I can ask, what was the financing at this point? Did you have a
self-financing? Not me. No, my wife would have killed me. I did that once. We got investors on this one, so we found some investors, and that's how we did it.
And
thank God.
What's the status of the film as we speak?
Well, we're looking for distribution. I mean, we started off our first 3 festivals. We had Woodstock, Wichita, or Tallgrass, Wichita, and then Nashville, and we got 2 audience awards for the first 2. And then last couple of weeks I went to St. Louis, Minneapolis, and then I went to Coronado, and now in New York City. So I'm just doing the doc New York City. Just finished the last screening today. And so we're just basically, I got to hope that we'll find a home sooner or later. It's funny seeing these audiences, because much easier when they've seen your other film. And I would ask the audience, it says, how many people here saw the first film? And 50% of the people would raise their hand, which made it so much easier knowing I have 50% that already know what they're kind of going to see, but also I have a new audience. Do you know what I mean? And that's what I want to do, is always build on that. And, I will leave no stone unturned when I'm trying to promote. I'm just, what was it? Herb Alpert said, I think on the Mark Maron show, they were talking about me because of the doc, and they said, "Oh, he's like a pit bull. He won't give up," and I won't. I will fight for every seat filled. Just like, I send postcards to schools, music shops, music stores. I want people to see this because these musicians are so special. And they need to be heard.
And they really are. And it's funny, as I said briefly before we started recording this, I'm surprised that you and I haven't met because we run around in the same path. One of the paths that you crossed that I was involved with, this will surprise you, not just the music stuff, which I can tell you about, but you apparently were, it says, location producer for IMAX films.
All right, that's how I know you.
Because I was a senior VP at Sony for a while, supervising IMAX films.
Remember, yeah.
But then it's weird because I know half the people in the film that you got here, from...
Yeah. It's funny because I knew you from somewhere else, but we might not have ever met, but I always knew your name from IMAX. That's funny.
I had a wonderful day once with Carole King filming Carole after Tapestry for Lou Adler.
Wow.
And I have a great picture. She saw me with the camera on my shoulder, and she wanted to put it on her shoulder, so I gave it to her, and just looks like she's filming me.
That's so cool.
Yeah. She was. I think she had just had a baby, too, or maybe so. It was probably a few months after Tapestry or whatever. Let's back up a little bit. I'm very curious to hear about your background and how you got involved in films and your early jobs and work and that sort of thing.
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, Northridge in the Valley, and I went to Loyola Marymount, for college. I wanted to be a writer. That was what I thought I wanted to be. Ended up finding out I'm not a writer. You know why? Because you got to write every day. If you don't write, you don't have a writer. But I did. I fell into doing films and as a art department. And my first job was a film called Eating Raoul as a set decorator, and it was a very dark black humor, as they called it then, and that kept me going for a while. And then I became, graduated from college and went into gripping and lighting. I did a lot of rock videos in those days. And then from there, I was burning out, and I got a chance to do those IMAX films, and which was awesome because when you're doing an IMAX film in those days, even though I was a grip, I was 25% of the crew. So we were basically traveling the world, having a good old time, doing great whites, going to the Serengeti, just 3 or 4 of us.
Were you working with McGilvery Freeman at all?
No, I was working with George Casey and his company, Graphic Films, and they were the only 2 companies that owned a IMAX film that was legally IMAX, if you remember, because McGilvery had the other one,
camera.
The W4. Camera. They had the W4 camera, and we had one. God, you're bringing up things I can't believe I even remember.
Now here's my IMAX camera right here. Right?
That's right. And the sad thing is, it's almost as powerful. Much easier to carry up a mountain with that thing than what. Did that for about 5-6 years, and I think that's when I started this. I started producing. I had done so many different jobs. I started producing for friends, videos, small spots, and then started the documentary, and then continued to produce for Comedy Central, different things for shows and stuff.
Do you play an instrument?
Not at all. That goes to my writing career. You got to practice. You can't become a player unless you practice. It's funny because my father used to tell in those seminars he used to do, he goes, you can get lucky in golf. You could go up there and knock the ball, and you could go 300 yards, but you know what? You can't do that with guitar. You got to practice. And I just never did. It's one of probably my biggest regrets.
Really?
Yeah, I do, because I'm jealous of all my friends. I'm envious of all my friends that are not even professionals, but they could sit and play a guitar and play a James Taylor song or a Carole King song or whatever song they want to play. And they could be with other people playing and having such a good time. And, it just stumps me. I know it sounds crazy. It just stumps me.
Well, not that this is comparable, but when I was growing up, my dad, who was in the business too, but, he played golf.
Oh, wow.
I never played golf when I was a kid. The kids weren't allowed on the golf course, or he never took me or my brother to play golf. We did everything else.
Right.
We threw baseballs and footballs and everything.
Yeah.
And now, after 100 years, here I am. I'm somewhat obsessed with golf, and I see all these kids on the golf course, and I think that's how wonderful that they're there.
Yeah. People say, oh, there's no time. It's true. I could still learn, and I still try to learn. But I think I burn out so many teachers along the way. I got to find a new teacher every time.
Well, what would you play? Guitar or something else?
Yeah, I would play guitar. Just because I have guitars. Oh, I own guitars. They look good on the wall, as my wife she loves to look at and complain.
What's your next project?
I'm seriously looking at something to do with, I don't know if I should say, but there's a project that I would love to do on Wolfman Jack. And that would be my trilogy if that comes through.
So I went to USC film school with George Lucas.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
George Lucas made a documentary about Wolfman Jack when we were there at school.
Did he?
Yeah.
So that was the connection? I know because I always think of
Graffiti? Was he in Graffiti?
Yeah.
I guess so. That was one of his projects that I remember. So you might want to look into that.
I think I will.
And as a matter of fact, I don't know what
that
this
would be awesome.
It was like an hour-long film, which was, we were making 10-minute films, and George was doing hour-long documentary. But the credits of the film come in the middle of the film.
No.
Like 20 minutes in, there's like a roll of credits, and then it goes on and tells the rest of it.
It's so funny. I remember my father worked on his, what was it,
THX 1138 4EB.
Yeah, my father worked on that. Because I know it's in the, what do you call it, on the American Federation of Musicians, you get those contracts coming to you. And it's like, oh, he worked on that. So how old was he? He must have been 18, 19 when he did that?
George?
Oh, no, must have after college, obviously.
Well, he made a student film. His kind of thesis film was a student version of THX 1138 4EB.
Oh, how much further after?
This was the original THX film,
right?
And then 2 or 3 or 4 years later, his first film out of the box, I think with Francis producing, I can't remember, was the theatrical version of that film, which, in my personal opinion, wasn't nearly as good as the student film.
Right.
The student film, and the fact that it was only a student, he had. I don't want to get off into George, but not only was he a terrific filmmaker, he had figured out how to get all the gear and all the equipment that he needed by taking advantage of the Air Force enlisted men who were in the school, and they had a ton of equipment in the film.
Hey, hold on, please. Hi, we're okay. Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm at a hotel.
That's all right.
Come on in.
Tell me.
Towels? Make my bed? Sure, come on in.
What haven't I asked you about here? Do you want to talk about anything else about the music or about the talent?
Well, I think where we're at with the business. I'd love to hear from you. It's interesting how, everybody's scared about documentaries or where we're going with the distribution all the time. But the truth is, I think we just can't give up. We're going to find, it's really about spreading the word. And thank God you have a show and others, we want to spread word about these stories. That's the only way these stories ever get heard. You know what I mean? And with immediate family, for me, what's different about this film is the fact that these guys have a band and they're playing. So I have something that's kind of unique, that I can have these guys be on the road at the same time the film's on the road. So that's what's exciting, you know. The difference between these guys and the Wrecking Crew, by the way, for those want to see, if they've seen the Wrecking Crew, in the 60s, the guys never went on the road. My dad never left the studio. If you were working in the studio, it was a lot of money. It was gravy train if you were really busy. And you would never go on the road because it didn't pay well. It wasn't, not a good life. It was hard life. I mean, it was a good life, but it was harder. And if you want to, so you stayed in town in the 60s. When the 70s rolled around, these guys could go on the road because they weren't session players that were locked in at that point. And I think how that business changed, they started giving the songwriters and the artists more control over the product, and realizing when they went on the road with the band that just recorded it, it became another selling point, I think. And then tours started making money for these people. And that's what happened. And that's the difference between these two films, is these guys could record it and then go on the road. You never would want my father to record and go on the road. It just wasn't, he's not going to be the Beach Boy.
Did these musicians in the Wrecking Crew and the later immediate family all read music, or did they just come in and listen to a rough of some sort and figure it out?
I think everybody's different. Like Glenn Campbell couldn't read a note.
Really?
My dad couldn't read a note. But elephant ears, my dad said. My dad always said in the early 60s when they were doing that rock and roll, those instrumentals and stuff, he said he felt like he was the best rock and roller of all of them. Glenn was, couldn't read a note though. He would just turn to the guys, ask a question, or they would figure it out on the chart and then just let him go. Most of the other guys could read pretty much. My dad was a different kind of animal. They said he was an extraordinary reader, and that's why his career went into film and TV, because he could sit there, wait 70 bars of music, and then, on a film, and then all of a sudden have a solo and be able to do it and not freeze. These guys can pretty much, I think they can read music. They all read pretty much, but again, they're not called to do that in this. They're called to be themselves. You want Waddy for Waddy. You don't want him reading the music. Same thing with, all of them. Leland, though, again, can read music. So.
It would be a great, if they went to do that, and if you could get it together, it would be take the film and the band, the family on the road. Yeah. So you watch the film first, and then the immediate family does, a short concert after the film.
Well, actually, we are actually doing that in Aspen on December 3rd. I'm going to Aspen on December 2nd, showing the film, and then December 3rd they're gonna play in a concert at the same theater. So that's the goal. It's it's really the guys. Don't forget, the guys still have these other gigs. Even though they have their own band, they're still with Waddy's still with Stevie Nicks. As their MD, and Leland might be going out on the road again with Lyle Lovett. I mean, those are big tours. They're in their 70s, but they're still in demand.
Peter Asher is in your film. What didn't he have?
Yeah.
What did he have to do with the Beatles at some point? Wasn't he?
Oh well, he was the head of Apple Records.
That's what I thought. Yeah, for a while.
Yeah,
right.
And that's a great story. Is if you take Peter Asher out of the story, meaning lift him out of all of their lives, music changes everywhere, because what happens is Danny and James Taylor would go to the Cape, and they met over the summers in the Cape, and they both musicians. They would play as teenagers, and all of a sudden they become friends, and they start up a band in New York City, and they call it James Taylor and the Flying Machine, and they're playing at a club called the Night Owl, It lasts for about an hour, about a year. And then James quits, and he's thinking about going to England. It's probably 68, it must be 68, 69. And he says tells Danny, Danny says, well, look up this guy. Peter Asher. I know him from, when I used to work with him here. And so he goes, okay. I just visualize it. And Peter knocking on, or James going to England, meets up with Peter, says, oh, you're a songwriter? Yeah. Play me something. And he goes, okay. And he plays him some of the songs he's written. And at that point, Peter Asher says, would you like a contract? He says, sure. And I say that because I also heard from Peter, they went through thousands of pieces of thousands of artists to look for an artist, for this Apple Records, and James becomes the first one. And that guy just knocked on the door, in a sense.
And Peter had a good ear, obviously.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that basically, but after the first album, something happens, it falls apart, so he decides to go to Warner Brothers in L.A., so he comes to Los Angeles with James, and Danny's already in L.A., so they're together again. And then they hire Carole and Russ, and they basically do the album Sweet Baby James, and now they have to tour it, and they find Leland, who's actually at CSUN, Northridge College, in the science department, but he's playing bass at night. And they ran it, they found him, James found him with this other group called Wolfgang. He saw him play, and he said, yeah, this guy's really great. So they get him to come out. Hey, would you like to do a month tour? He said, sure. Thinking he'll go back to college afterwards, and never went back. So unfortunately, he did get his career. So, or his diploma. He got a career. He didn't get a diploma.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, I want to thank you so much, Denny, for taking the time.
Thank you, Chuck.
I know you're busy in New York, and I hope you'll let me know when this film, I'm sure, when people see it, that it's going to get picked up on one of the majors, because it's such a joy. It's such a joyous, wonderful, upbeat, fabulous film.
Please, like I said, if you guys go to the website, immediatefamilyfilm.com, you can see the outtakes, because as you know, Chuck, those are the best things, because we have so much fun with those things that you can never put in there.
I'm going to turn off the tape recorder now. Wait, don't disconnect. Is there anything else you want to say before I turn this off?
No, I think we got it.